How are we doing? Welcome to the Yochum Brothers podcast. We have a good guest, and Chris is a little bit nervous because technically he has all his bosses here in the room, so he's got to be on point today.
That's a good point, actually. I didn't think all of them.
All of them. So he's all prim and proper, making sure all the boxes are ticked.
So I put the clean shirt on. It's all good.
Put the clean shirt on. But we have John Grunewald, and we find that talking with people, seeing their stories, is so important, and understanding how people got to where they are, understanding that story is a huge part of being able to deal with your own story and your own life. You know, I find that listening to other people's stories gives you so much encouragement, and it also gives you so much direction when you're dealing with similar things.
It feels like people just fell into place sometimes when you hear the backstory and how they got to where they are. John is a part of RHEMA in the States. Your sector, John, is RHEMA is Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, I believe. And so that's quite a large area to cover. It's quite amazing to see people like yourselves taking the gospel to those areas. And so that's really what we want to talk about today.
Oh, great. Yeah, happy to answer anything I can.
So you've taken this, RHEMA being the Bible school and also church plants, I believe. So you're involved in church plants and things like that. How is that, especially coming from like the Midwest in the States, how different is that, and how much do you change your adaptability when you go into places like Europe or Africa or even the Middle East? How much do you change of what you do?
Well, we definitely changed some things a lot just because of mentality and culture.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why we build very good teams in all of those places, because they're going to be better at it in some places than we might be. Now, we have lived in Europe for 27 years, so we kind of get that part of it a little better than Africa or the Middle East.
Yep.
Yeah, so that part was a little easier for us than the rest, even though that definitely took time to figure out some of the mindset there too. But, and part of it for me it was interesting to me even in the early years. We had Europe in our heart for many years, started in a prayer meeting with Brother Hagin years before that, and just stayed there. And it was only that one word and just like, okay, Europe. And about all we could do with that word at the time was pray.
Yep.
And we helped friends who were going to Europe go to Europe. I mean, that meant drive them to the airport, mow their lawn while they're gone, get their mail, give some money, anything we could do to stay in that direction. Well, when the time finally came and we went over there, that was certainly different than taking people to the airport.
Yeah.
Most of those friends were, they would go over for a couple of weeks or a month and come back. But our first trip to Europe was 6 months before we moved there. Mm-hmm. And even though we'd had Europe, I always say it was tucked in our heart.
Yep.
Because for years it wasn't something we said much about at all. Mm-hmm. Didn't seem like it was something we should talk to other people about, but talk to God. Mm. And slowly that came out a little bit more. But when the time came, then we took a trip over to teach in some Bible schools in Sweden, Estonia, and then stopped by to visit some friends in Germany. And we were just going to be there for 3 days or so. Mm. And on the way back over the North Atlantic heading to the States, Michelle and I just both knew that we should move to Germany.
Mm. That was the first.
Honestly, that was the first clue we had about that.
Mm. Yeah.
So for over a decade, we'd been praying about Europe, but never a country.
Mm. Mm.
Then
I like that.
The adaptability came there.
People see, they get something in the heart and they think they have to do it. You're saying what you had in your heart was over a decade. And people get discontented sometimes because they got Europe in their heart, but they're still where they were.
Yeah.
And you get that, you keep praying for it. You were active in that word, as in like you were praying, you were helping people go over there, you were financially supporting, but you yourself, you weren't actually there. I really like that the Lord can actually drop something into your heart that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. And sometimes when we don't see that change, like we don't get on a plane and move to Europe, that we still continue in that until the next step comes to you. So I really, that's really cool.
And it makes you wonder sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Did I hear right?
Did I? Yeah. Yeah.
When that much time goes by, you're like, well, maybe I misunderstood that.
Yeah.
And because we had actually gone to pastor, and I can remember driving to the city where we were going to pastor, and my big question was, God, what does this have to do with Europe?
Yeah.
And, I couldn't connect the dots. When you look back, it's so clear that you can't see how you would miss it. But, so that was the big question, was how does this connect? But it was, if we'd have gone 10 years earlier, I'd have ruined it.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready, not in any way, shape, or form to go there. Because, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, I was subbing for a class at RHEMA USA. And a lady comes up to me after class and she says, well, I really have Europe on my heart too. And I said, how long have you had it in your heart? She said, for a month. I said, if it's as strong a year from now as it is right now, come and talk to me. Never heard from her again.
You definitely...
those kind of things have to stay.
Yeah.
It's funny you're saying about, you question it. It's funny when you get to a place you've been building up to for a long time as well, and then the plan changes. That's another time when you're sort of going, hang on, I thought I was going here.
Yeah.
I know you know that I've been through that.
Yeah, it's kind of roundabout ways. It's like if you ever listen to Mark Hankins, he talks about, sitting down watching somebody play golf, and because of the contour of the green, you never putt straight at it. If you have, some little hills or something in the way, you can putt almost at a 90-degree angle sometimes to where the hole is, and that is the best route there. And God does that with us all the time.
Yeah, we think
so
it's...
I want to go back to the adaptability thing. Yeah. Part of it for me was I spent the first 15 years of my life in Wisconsin. And as a kid growing up, I think 1 out of every 2 people was 100% German heritage. And I thought everybody had a German last name growing up. Then, of course, we moved around some since then. But when we moved to Germany, it didn't feel that strange to me. Because I'd been around German background people. Now, to my wife, after we lived there a while, she said, oh, my God, she goes, we moved to a whole country of Johns. And that wasn't a compliment. I had to repent.
It's my struggle. I'm constantly surrounded by people with German heritage as well. No matter where I go.
You fit in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was, we have no complaints about any of that time.
Yeah. So now you're, at the moment, especially with what's going on in the world, you're based in Tulsa at the moment, but still reaching out to those places.
Is it based in Tulsa or stuck in Tulsa?
Stuck in Tulsa, based in Tulsa, however you want to put that.
We've been, trying to reapply for a visa to the UK for, a year and a half now?
Yep.
And that's just... we just finally got word that when travel restrictions are lifted, we can reapply.
Yeah.
So we've been, most of the last year, it's been in the States. I took one trip to Africa between, June of this year and now, last year. But other than that, it's been the longest time we've ever been in the U.S. in 27 years.
Wow. Yeah. So how do you find that now leading these teams and that are in that place and not being in that same place, to be able to be there with them and journey with them? Has it got its own challenges, or you got good teams there?
Both.
But yeah,
good teams, and fortunately, we have already a relationship with these people. Mm-hmm. So we have spent time together and a lot of emailing through the years. So at least for most of those teams, the relationship is good enough that it functions very well remotely. Mm-hmm. We are getting to the point now where we're adding on to teams the people that we don't know. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little different than trying to deal with it over something like Zoom. It's great, but it's not face to face. And so there's, you still have to have some face to face time in there, but I'm just glad that we've been doing Zoom type meetings for years. So when this whole Corona thing hit, it really didn't change anything for us. We just did more of it.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that the Zoom, I don't know how many times in the last couple of months people, how do you like Zoom? How good's that going? I'm like, it's been going for years. It's not new.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. I was glad that wasn't a new thing for us.
Well, you had such a big spread. Like you think of like that's, a big chunk of the world there, what you're leading with Africa. Not exactly next door. They connect in some ways, but they're not like just around the corner. So I guess that was something that you had to do, even if you were with one team, all the others were sort of from a distance anyway. So a majority of that is being led from a distance.
Well, the majority of not majority. I said majority because you said majority. You're leading me. When we go to places, the most of the things you talk about is leadership structures, systems. That's, I suppose, having to lean on a lot of what you teach to get through ministry now.
Yeah, and that was never something that was really planned either. In the early years, I never really thought that I would spend so much time in this direction. But that goes back to a couple of things. I mean, number one, I didn't ever care if I led anything.
Yeah,
I'm definitely more of a team type player, but I didn't care what role I played on that team, and that was just part of discovering, the calling that you have, and then you have to develop it. You can do one without the other, and you don't make a very good leader. So, and for me, that was a lot of work and a lot of years, and still doing it. And I found out that even through our whole network and beyond, that probably one of the biggest thing that was lacking was, how to build teams and how to lead, how to communicate more effectively. Because without those, we're stifled all the time on trying to really build the church the way God wants to. So I ended up spending a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the church is known to not do. It's sort of one of those areas, that's just the physical. That's how the world deals with things. We just deal with it spiritually, but not understanding that you've still got those structures that you've got to develop and connect and to create that environment for things to succeed.
Yeah, that's a huge deal because people think, sometimes in the church they think that organization is a dirty word. And it's not. Structure actually is spiritual. We see it all through Scripture if we're looking for it. I missed it for years in some things, but now when I look, I just like, oh my gosh, how did I miss that all this time? Old Testament and New Testament, it was full of team building and leading and delegating, all of those kinds of things. But the church has pushed that away, like you said, they're thinking it's not spiritual, but where did the world actually get these principles? They got them from the Bible, not the other way around. So the world just developed it better than the church did, and that's one of the reasons, sometimes why we suck a little bit.
No, it does. It's very interesting because people think that those elements, creating a structure and giving people responsibilities and all those things, that will stop the flow of the Holy Spirit and all these ideas and misconceptions.
Facilitating it.
But it actually facilitates it. It actually helps it grow. It helps it develop. You see it especially when people that have never had a position in a church or any sort of responsibilities or leadership, and then they get put in and then they're like, oh, I'm being corrected here, and I'm being told, no, we've got to do it this way, and this is the direction that we've got from the Lord, and this is how we're doing it. And then they're sort of like, oh, okay. But it when you see a church that gets a hold of that, the speed of their growth and their ability of what they can do and achieve grows so much so quickly.
It does. It's and if somebody just will accept what's in the Word about some of that stuff, it makes a huge difference. It's mine goes way back to when I was first saved. I got saved a week after I graduated from high school at 17 years old, and the first church I went into was a very conservative denominational church, and it was my first church. I loved all the people there. I thought, wow, this is awesome. But at the same time, I'm thinking, when I gave my life to Christ, I didn't do it for fire insurance. I did it because people told me that Jesus had changed their life and he'd changed mine. Mm-hmm. And so that night when I laid in bed and received Christ, I said, okay, if you're as big as people say you are, I will give you my life. But if you aren't, I said, this is going to be a short experiment.
Yeah.
and I meant it.
Yeah.
And so then when I go into the church building then as a new Christian, I'm expecting to see these changed lives.
Yeah.
And what I find are people that were living mostly like the world, talking a little different than the world, but really not much transformation. And that bothered me. Mm-hmm. And because I didn't want to have a life like I had been living or I'd come out of. That was the whole point.
Yeah.
And so it put me on a quest to really figure out, what is the deal with the church? Why is it so weak looking sometimes and unattractive? Why was there so much failure in leadership and so many hurt people leaving churches? And so, I probably spent the better part of the first 30 years with that in the back of my mind, trying to find answers to that as a Christian. And then even as a young leader. So I would say it probably took me 30 years before I had what I would call more complete answers to some of that. And then you're like, oh, okay, I get that. And part of that came in with, just in my reading, you're reading through the Gospels, and I got to, Matthew 16, where, Jesus is walking along with his disciples, and he asked the question, which is a great leadership quality right there. He wasn't afraid to ask questions. And he said, who do people say that I, the Son of Man, am? And so they gave him some answers, right? They said, well, some say you're John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. And every answer was wrong that they gave. But he was wanting to find out what the crowds were saying. And even though they hadn't guessed right, and he didn't even correct them. He just said, who do you say that I am? And, of course, Peter speaks up, and he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, well, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood, you didn't get this, you got it from God. You didn't get it from man, you got it from God. It was a revelation. And as soon as Peter spoke that out and revealed Jesus as the Christ, Jesus revealed or declared what he was going to do for the next 2,000 years. And he said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And when I was reading that one day, many, many years ago, it was like God put the brakes on and read that again and again and again and again. And it slowly came to me, not that day, but as I kept reading it, that really to me, and this is personal opinion now, that is the greatest commission that we have in the New Testament is build the church. We've always said Matthew 28 was, that go into all the world. That's a great commission, but I don't think it's the greatest because going into all the world is really the first step from the building the church. Everything fits under I will build my church. Everything doesn't fit under go into all the world. So it built from there, and I wanted to see, okay, what does it mean to build the church? And You don't build anything without a plan. I know you guys don't, do you?
No.
I mean, at least generally speaking.
Yeah.
And God doesn't either. And we shouldn't build local churches without plans and all of those kind of things. But yet we're so spiritual sometimes we're just going to flow. Mm. Well, I don't see that working very well for most people.
Mm. No.
If we will flow inside the structure that God gives us, it works a lot better. So anyhow, on that.
Well, it's like even, when you get a structure, you have a backbone. We all have a structure, but that gives you the ability to flow and the lasting power to do the things that you're called to do, to move where he wants you to go. Without structure, like you say, things don't last. You don't last by getting a word 10 years later down the track without having some sort of structure in there to work that plan out. See, if we're just hoping that that's still going to be in us in 10 years or it's just going to happen without having some sort of structure or a platform or some foundation to build upon, we try and do things without foundations. And, we know that even in Scripture, he talks about people building on the sand, and we know Jesus to be our foundation, and we know that we can build upon that very revelation of who he is. And like we were just talking about, that he gave them a revelation of who Jesus was and then opened up about building the church. Like he said, for the next 2,000 years, I will build my church. And so,
No, go ahead.
Now we have that.
That's a pretty good long-term plan, 2,000 years. Right?
Yeah. Exactly. And so there is this structure and this foundation that can be laid first, and it should be laid first. And without it, we become, we can do anything for a time. We can flow for a time, but there's no lasting value to it without having that structure behind it. It just...
Well, Jesus even had that. Jesus even had the structure. Like he had the 12 disciples. They had jobs. They had, you see that through Scripture. They had positions and responsibilities that they were doing. They were learning. They were there to take the church on.
Yeah.
But afterwards, there was still that structure there, and that was Jesus. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Jesus had, he was the only one really that was ever called to do something on his own as far as the part of going to the cross. But when he started on his earthly assignment, the first thing he did was recruit a team. And then he after he recruited, he built them, and we might say discipled. And, then he led them. And that's something that we teach too. We want people to, when they're given an area of responsibility, and we don't delegate till somebody is, 80% capable, right? We can help fill in the other 20. We want to see them succeed, but we want them to be mostly capable. And then one of the things that we want them to do is to recruit, build, and lead a team, because it's the model we had. From Jesus. So if we can, there's a lot of little points inside of all that, but if we can teach people how to do that, we're going to do much more than we ever could on our own. One of the things that we tell teams is, let me back up. If you want to be a positional leader, which we've seen a lot of in the church, which is basically you're a leader because of your position. Maybe you're a pastor or whatever. And you just lead from that and you just tell people what to do, right? It's more authoritative than anything. If you're a really good person, that might work some. But we're really looking to build developmental leaders that have the qualities of a positional leader or relational leader, all those kinds of things. But a developmental leader, our model was Jesus. And so he was there not just to do a job, but to develop people along the way. So when we build teams, what we expect from them is that they are going to be able to think. And that everything that they learned in the foundation of their Christianity, they can put to work, put to use toward whatever assignment they have been given. that people say, well, does this leave room to be led by the Spirit? Yeah, a lot of room. In fact, we expect you to be led by the Spirit. If you're coming back with ideas that are worse than the ones I'm getting, then what good are you as a team where that's concerned, right? I expect the team, once given direction, to bring back plans, ideas, recommendations on how that can be fulfilled in the best possible way. I'm not going to think all that up. That's not my job any longer. So we train teams, and we expect that out of them, to use everything they learned in their foundation to grow as leaders. Then it's, I think what happens lots of times, and this was, it's one of those things you wish you'd have seen 20 years ago, but we're very good, I think, at building foundations, but people decided to live there instead of grow from there. We don't live in the foundation, do we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to build on top of it, and then you live. And too many people are living in the foundation. They've never come out of some of the very elementary things and found out who they were in Christ, and having emotional maturity, all those kinds of things. So it's, it's a big building process to get to where we're supposed to go.
And like you're saying, with developing leaders and that, and let them be led by the Spirit. If you look at that, like at the start, the authoritarian leader, it doesn't give anyone room. If you have to tell them to be led by the Spirit, or you relying on you to be led by the Spirit, not enabling them to be led by the Spirit, then you see that sort of stifles it more. When previously we would have looked at that as being, okay, the pastor's being led and we'll just follow, rather than taking direction from the pastor and building upon that and being led yourself. Because it's always a relational with the Lord. It's always to the one. And so it's not just, we want to develop that in people and not just sort of push that, or you have to be led on everything. John needs to get it first in order for us to, be led that way, or, you have these different ideas sometimes. But the direction, yes, is to come from that leader and flow down, but still gives you more freedom rather than less. Yeah. Like I was saying before.
Well, I don't know about you guys because I don't know all of your background, but I certainly worked under leaders even in the body of Christ who probably fit into that more positional, authoritative place as a leader. And I don't think they knew that we could think. But if you were ever a part of a team in a church, you had ideas.
Yeah.
And it's not that 100% of anybody's ideas are awesome and great and workable, but a lot are.
Yeah.
But nobody was ever asking us for those. And if you did give an opinion and it went contrary to theirs, then you were rebellious.
Yeah.
And we just do not function that way, and that's not our culture. We want people to have the freedom to express, right, inside the bounds of the word. There's safe harbor to give ideas, and as a leader, you still have to approve the ideas. But we expect people to come up with ideas, think them through, propose it, and then we can go, yeah, that's awesome. Maybe we have to fix something here or there because of budget or whatever, but we 100% expect people to grow in that.
Well, a lot of
I don't have time to do all the thinking.
Well, that's it. Well, I said a lot of the team around you, you want them to be. Well, I know, maybe you, John. A lot of your team might be smarter than you. So
what are you trying to say, Chris?
No,
wow, did you see that? I picked up on that.
It's that's the sort of team you want.
Right.
Like, it makes you look good. So
yeah.
Well, if you take Chris's wife Amelia, for instance, if she is way smarter than me in a lot of things, and and that benefits me greatly, and it benefits our teams. When she first started, we called her my personal assistant, but I had to change that to executive assistant because she was way better than personal. So, she's an amazing person with a huge amount of knowledge that is greatly benefited us.
Well, that happened here in the church here in Geelong, because when Chris came across, it's just transition phase, but I don't know how we would have gone as well through the whole shutdown if Chris wasn't here, because Chris pushed us in a lot of ways with that. No. If you're going to do this online thing, you're going to need this and you're going to need this. And it's like, do we really need a switcher? Do we really need a new camera? Because you're thinking, we've got to pay for this, and then is it going to last long? And, will it all just be over? But that push, that someone else saying, no, this is where we need to get to. This is sort of level that we've got to do it. That you need people to push you in that. Because when you're when you're the one responsible for it, you're thinking of just how do you pay for it? How do you do this? How do you do that? Instead of, having people around you help push you as well.
Yeah. But what you're saying there is important, and it tells me something about you, that you're not insecure. Because if you're an insecure leader and people below you even are pushing a little bit, that bothers you. That's usually the end of somebody. And we want people to push, because sometimes, a younger person comes along and says something and you go, oh man, you're right.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about that. Yeah. And, your mind just starts spinning of all the work that's going to create, but at the same time, it's right. And so I think every good leader has to have people like that around them. Not like you guys know Chris better than I do even, but one of the things I've noticed about him over the years I've known him is he has one of these rare qualities that he can read people in a situation very quickly. And I love it when people have that, and I've really only known a few people through the years that had it like that. And because they'll say something after meeting somebody for 10 minutes, and I've known the person a year, and I go, huh. They're right. I never verbalized that, but that was back here somewhere. And they met him in 10 minutes and verbalized. I'm thinking, how do you do that? So it's great to have people around like that have those abilities. And, it's the old thing, it's the body working together, right? We're more complete. So nothing to be afraid of. We celebrate it.
Well, the biggest thing with pushing, because I do push you guys a bit, and like it does happen, but it's understanding the vision from your leadership. I know for me working in a position underneath leaders, if I can understand the direction they need to go, and then your leaders are willing to let you push in that direction, if you're staying in line with the vision, it's amazing what you can accomplish.
Because there's an element of that. You're not pushing cross culture, because you can have that and people sometimes understand this. We had tried to head this direction for a while now to go online. There was some hurdles and things like that. So you knew that was a direction that we were heading. And so if it was something that we weren't heading there and someone's trying to push there, it becomes annoying or hard, or you don't embrace it then as much. And because you can have both of that, and if you just feel like that's not the direction we're supposed to go, but because there is this, we talk about certain things like, man, we want to get online somehow, we want to do this, we want to do podcast things, we started this a long time ago, and so then when you push with the direction, even though the leader may not be, because when it's on you, you got to think of the whole thing. You got to think of the budget. You got to think of so you're not thinking of sometimes because the budget is there.
Chris likes to push the budget.
Yeah.
But that's what it's there for, isn't it?
I saw John grin then. That was like, so I think he pushes on the whole front.
And so you do look at the best deal. You do look at the best way to do things. You do become creative in that area, but you're not pushing cross the culture.
Yeah.
You're not pushing against what the direction of the way you're going. You're pushing the direction of you know that this is where you want to go. If you're working for a leader and you can understand where they want to go and you push that direction, you're helping them. You're helping the whole team. You're helping. If you're pushing against the tide or against where
Well, you
they
might
want
want
to
to
go.
question the leadership you're putting yourself under if you think you need to go crossways.
Crossways, that's the thing. Yeah, you can really butt heads. Things become confusing. Things become you don't. It's just not a good fit sometimes when you're always across. But when you can actually help and lift them up and they might not know the full technical side and you assist them with that and certain things like we've seen here. And so that is, following that same path as a team going there together. Whereas rather than just all going separate ways and individuals and doing things like that where you have to tell someone, I need this now. Well, you might know what you need.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, you might know where you're meant to go. So
that's a great discussion to have. And, I think sometimes, that's really not a verbalized conversation. And that's a good one to have with teams, pastors, leaders in general, because sometimes they don't understand that's what's happening. We assume that if the leader is following a godly direction, that there should be some kind of flow there for that. And so like what you're saying is if anybody can connect with that and push a little bit, I mean, if you've ever been in a canoe or a raft, even if you're going with the current, you got to work with it to keep you going so you're not running into something. And so you want people on there that aren't just laying back in the raft doing nothing and you're doing all the work.
Yeah.
And I like people that'll push better than I like to have to pull a whole group of people.
That's a great example that when because you're not pushing against, it sounds like you're pushing someone to do something that they don't want to do. But when you're in the canoe and you're going the same way, you pushing is helping.
It's straightening. And it's
it's just you're working together with them. You're taking some of that load, and when you have multiple people doing the work, it becomes easier. And what you do, you can go further. Yeah, that's a great example.
The other part of that one is, and here's something that Michelle and I have talked about recently, is that there's a lot of people that are my age, and I'm 63 now, but there's a lot of people my age that are basically, they're not going to say they're done, but they are not pushing for anything new. And if you work under that, and they used to have a vision, but that vision is just kind of plateaued, that gets difficult also. And we've had this conversation with some of our leaders that it's time to invite in some younger people to be a part of your leadership teams because you're not pushing anymore. And we need some younger guys in that will push. And of course, everybody sits back for a minute and goes, oh, and they go, yeah, you're right. We do need that. And that's one of the reasons why you can't have a group of people my age doing everything. But, Brother Hagin didn't even start RHEMA until he was 58.
Wow.
Yeah, think how exciting that must have sounded.
Yeah.
But again, he didn't do it on his own. And God's not expecting us to do any of it on our own either. So I think that it's a good thing to mix in younger, more aggressive leaders and not frustrate them. Help them grow. The other part of a team is one of the things Jesus showed us is that there has to be a succession plan, right? I'm not going to live forever, and somebody has to keep doing the work. So if I don't allow people under me to ever grow and become who I am, then when I'm done, it's a one and done, right? And I don't want to be a one and done. I think that we should have built enough of a platform so that it can continue. Now, when Jesus, ascended to heaven, I think everybody was scratching their head going, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, that guy, he just left. And do we really trust these other guys yet?
Yeah.
Especially if you go through their credentials.
But look at how amazing they stepped up.
Yeah.
And I think other people will do the same given the chance. So, there's a lot to all that.
Yeah. There is a there's a certain DNA that RHEMA carries with itself, and you've been sort of tasked with taking that to multiple different cultures. How much of RHEMA do you have to adapt, because it was obviously created in the States, which is one culture, and now you're adapting it to, like, even when you take the gospel there, how do you honor that culture yet preach the gospel?
Mm-hmm. Good question. And I kind of know the answer to that, maybe. Let me start out here that, whatever we're in, whatever organization, the culture is coming from somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Even if we do nothing, there's a culture. Yeah. It's just probably not a good one. And in our circles, I mean, number one, we gather our culture from the Word of God. Mm-hmm. And we try and interpret that the best way possible and follow along with Brother Hagin's teachings, which are easy to do that way because we believe in it. Mm-hmm. Number two, we get it from the organization we're a part of, which is RHEMA. Mm. There's certain things that are just expected and, they're not an issue. We love it. So we do that, but it helps form who we are. And then beyond that, it comes down to who's leading it. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that become a part of the culture, like where we are, just because that's the way I want it done. Mm-hmm. So we get some different flavors around the world because of that. When Australia was functioning years ago, like in Australia and then South Africa, we saw a much more evangelistic flavor in DNA to RHEMA than we did in any other part of the world. Mm. And we tried to bring that part to the rest of it, and I don't know how successful we've ever been at that. We felt there was a flavor that needed to be there, but it was always such a teaching culture that it was hard to get people out of that and be evangelistic also. Mm-hmm. So that's, I say, Australia and South Africa succeeded with that better than I think the rest of the world did. Mm. Now, I think that's still something we have to encourage in our churches. And I mean, when it comes to Bible school, except for like, where you guys do the explosion days or something, it is teaching. Mm-hmm. It's not the beginning stage of the church where salvation is concerned. So, we're carrying a particular part of that around the world in the schools. But then when it comes to the churches, if we don't get that into them, they're not going to grow the way they should. Mm-hmm. So that's just generally on culture. I think I've said this to forever, I think, but when God sends you somewhere, it's for at least one of two reasons. One, to put something into you, or mm-hmm. two, to get something out of you that he put into you. Mm-hmm. And he's big enough to do both at the same time. Mm-hmm. So when we moved to Germany in 1993, we certainly had to make some adjustments, just in how we lived. But I also felt that God had put enough into us that this wasn't going to be a 180-degree turn to fit into culture, mm-hmm. that we should have been somewhat prepared. Now, fortunately for people like Michelle and I, we're kind of low-key people, so we're not making big glaring mistakes that everybody can see. Yeah, so that's a bonus. The one thing we did try and fit in with was our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And we had to learn all these unwritten rules. And fortunately, we had a very good neighbor to help us. That just after we had moved, when we first moved to Germany, we lived in a little village outside of Heidelberg, very pretty area. And so we had a small yard, and I'm out mowing the yard one day, and the neighbor sticks his head over the fence and he goes, "Hey, would you like to use my lawnmower?" I said, "No, I'm good." I'm good. And he did that a couple of times, over those first few weeks. And then I finally found out that there was quiet time between 12 and 2. And so his name was Ralph, and he stuck his head over the fence one day. I said, "Hey, Ralph, let me ask you a question. When you asked me if I needed to use your mower, is it because yours is electric and doesn't make noise? And I was mowing between 12 and 2, and he said, yeah. I said, why didn't you just tell me? And I said, is that a law or just one of those unwritten rules? He goes, that's an unwritten rule. I said, well, could you help me learn those so that I fit in? So I'm not the everybody in the neighborhood goes, oh, that's Americans. They might have said that anyhow. I don't know. Anyhow, so he helped me with a lot of those. And then we lived there about 5 years and moved up to Bonn. And we lived in that same house in Bonn for 17 years. And when I told the neighbor across the street that we were going to be moving, he said the German word. He goes, "Oh, schade," which kind of means bummer. and I said, "Oh, you'll find another good neighbor." And he said, "We'll never find as good a neighbor as you guys are." And I took that as a real compliment that that we were not just a neighbor, but that we were a good neighbor. And that's a hard thing to be there. It's neighborhoods there are not like in the U.S. or I can't speak for Australia too much, but you can live in a neighborhood in Germany and not know your neighbor after 20 years. They're very much to themselves, and we helped our neighbors as much as we could and lived within the rules most of the time. And so I think that part was beneficial to us, that we didn't stick out like a sore thumb. But we also weren't embarrassed to say why we were there. That we knew that we were there on an assignment from God. We had something to do, and most people respected that, even if we did it a little different than they were used to.
Yeah. You were saying before about culture when with Australia and what's it called, South Africa, bringing back culture to RHEMA. How do you think the best way about going about that was bringing culture back to an established ministry? Obviously, that's a challenge.
That is a challenge, and I don't know as if we figured that one out exactly, because it has to be something that's going to be embraced and then practiced. And it's not that that Tulsa isn't evangelistic. Pastor Hagen never does a service without having an altar call. I mean, he's very much in that mindset all the time, and he functioned as an evangelist for years. So, but I don't know as if that's where, as an organization, I think you want to look out at all of your parts and go, what can we bring back to make each area better? And that's a hard thing to do when you're a worldwide organization sometimes, and you're not always meeting together. But I would say that if we're going to be successful at it, we have to get together and talk about it and find out, hey, what are some of your best practices? Now, we took, when our son Spencer was in Brisbane, and he was funny because he said when they were going to do the explosion days at RHEMA there, he inside himself, he said, this will never work. People won't talk to you. But he was thinking German. And so they go out on the streets, and he said, Australians will stop and talk to you for an hour, Dad. He goes, it's amazing. They'll sit down and talk. And you can talk and lead them to Christ. And I said, wow, that would be hard to do where he grew up. Get somebody to stop and talk or even acknowledge you. Because sometimes you'll try and say something and people will just go, do I know you? No, they walk off. So it's the culture there was certainly more open and adaptable to be even evangelistic.
Well, it helps when you have people like Karen teaching you as well. She does push in a certain direction. So
Right. And so, but we took some of that and tried to bring that back into some of the campuses, even in Europe, and partially successful with that. But it's something we'd still like to see more of around the world. Is that would be even a stronger element? Because like Sarah, our daughter-in-law, she's Australian, and that's for some reason, family, culture, school, that's part of her DNA, and she doesn't like to go somewhere. If she gets a chance to talk to somebody, she will, and if she can lead them to Christ, she will. So it's certainly a part of her, and it's a lovely part of her too. And people that are around her like that. And she's had people ask her, "Could you teach me how to do that?" So, people have to want to, I guess, also. But yeah, it'd be great if there's some best practices that we should certainly commingle with a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I know with Sarah, she's definitely it's in her. It's just not. It's not something she's deliberately learnt. She can be difficult when you're with her because she'll just talk to anyone, anyone. So definitely not what I do naturally.
Yeah, no, but if we were as sweet and cute as her, it'd make it easier.
Definitely easier.
So, do you find it like when you went to Europe, especially, the church over there looks very different, and there's almost RHEMA type churches are non-established or at least haven't been established for many years. Is that easier to start a whole new thing, or like you say, where a culture is close, but like RHEMA is with trying to bring the evangelism side of it back, it's so close to that it's probably more of a slighter change. Is it easier to start a whole new thing over there, or to try and do something that's been cemented for so long, and that's just the way we've always done it? That try and do a slight change.
So tweaking rather
than creating something whole new, because the European church looks very different than what RHEMA is. So you're bringing something new.
Yeah, definitely something new. And it's, I probably didn't use this term in the early years. I like it. I like the term though. And is that I think every culture you go into, and sometimes even as seasons change through the years, like in my lifetime, you have to retool. Because where are people really coming from? Every generation, every age group seems to be coming from a different place. And, so you got to kind of try and figure that out a little bit. And that's a tough one in another culture, trying to figure that out. Where are they coming from? Because it seems to me that in most nations, the church culture follows the national political culture and not the other way around. I wish it was the other way around. And in Europe, because there's so much social democracy, that's the way the church functions too. And people expect the church to do a lot for them. And I told them up front, I'm not doing everything for you. I'm not going to make places for you to have friends. You have a dinner table, invite somebody over. Go out to coffee. So I was going a little bit cross-culture there, but I was trying to build some independency in people to look to God and not to the government for help. And so our job there wasn't to change the culture, but I felt we needed to change some church culture, even though God can work in any culture. So because I felt that we had something in particular to do, so we had to raise up a different breed of people. And I think, I think there's been success there with that. People told us, as a foreigner, we'd never be able to build a church. Well, we pastored for almost 13 years and had a church of almost 300 people before we turned it over to a German. And that was while we were doing Bible school and traveling. So it is doable, even though people say that you can't, because there are some people that want something different.
Well, you look at, obviously you put some time into the person you hands, like, Alex in Germany, spent some time with him. He's definitely not, you wouldn't put him in a pigeonhole as a standard German when you're talking to him. I think he probably can switch back to that if he wanted to, but he definitely had things put into him to be able to communicate well with you and bring about change in that culture as well.
Yeah, he did, and that's a great example of the Jehovah Jireh, God seeing your need ahead of time and having the answer there waiting for you. His mother was visiting. His parents live about 4 hours away, but his parents were visiting one time, and his mother came up to me after church, and this is before we'd had all the transition to where he was pastoring. He was working there by then.
Oh wait, just to catch these guys up, Alex is the guy that took over the church.
Yeah,
got it from context.
Yeah, context. Probably good to say that. He had been a student, and one day I was sitting at the kitchen table, and Michelle was doing something at the counter, and she said, if you don't grab Alex, somebody will.
Yeah.
And I sat there and went, yeah, you're right. And normally I would have waited, but that pushed me a little bit there. And so I called him up and I asked him to come over. And we sat there, and I just pretty much got to it. I said, Alex, the day is coming when I'm going to have to travel more, and I need somebody that can pastor the church as good or better than I can, and I think that person is you. And I said, but the deal is you can only tell your wife, and if you tell anybody else and I ever hear about it, I'll call you a liar from the platform. Because that would be disruptive for the church. And he never did tell anybody besides Rebecca. And so we went through almost a 5-year process, because he was 24 years old, I think. He started working in the office, and he'd never done that kind of work. I made him do finances. He hated it, but I made him do it anyhow. And because if he was going to pastor, he needed to know how to do some of that. So, he was just great. His English is almost perfect. Yeah. And without an accent. So anyhow, that all happens, and his mom comes up during that time, and she says, ever since Alex was 3 years old, he loved America and he liked English. And she goes, I never understood why. Because she said, nobody spoke English around where we lived. And I said, well, I can tell you why. And she goes, why? I said, because I needed him. And I needed him to be able to understand me. And he does.
Yeah, not
he
just the
totally
English,
gets
the
who I am.
he understands body language and, our Westerny, culture-y, weird things. He gets it. So
yeah, he's kind of... He has a WWJD bracelet, which means what would John do? and he can ask that question to himself before making a decision, and he knows what I would do, because the last year before we turned it over to him, I said, okay, Alex, from this point forward, you make all the decisions, you tell me what it is, and I'll tell you if I have any objections. So he did that for a year, and the church never knew it.
Yeah.
And I never had to go against him once in that year. So by the end of that year, I said, you guys, let's go ahead and make this official and turn it over, and then we're going to be on the road more. So, and I don't think since 2011, I don't think I've spoken at the church 4 times. I haven't been there very much. So, God brings people, he prepares people, and he brings them your way. So that helped with the whole adapting to the culture too, is having people on the other side that understood who we were and not fighting it.
Yep.
Not going against it.
You can,
it's a tricky thing. Culture is.
It is.
Yeah.
You can watch, they live stream their services, don't they? Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely, if you're listening and you want to check that out, it's a good sermon to watch. Do they podcast? Do you know?
Alex is starting some podcasts now, I think. I don't know if they turn that service into one or not, because they've been on, there's a TV station in Germany that's had him on for a couple of years now. And so he's out there that way. But I think YouTube is where I usually watch, like they do some other stuff too. So Alex is an excellent teacher, and he's funny.
Yeah.
English speaking.
It does both. Yeah, it's all translated.
It does both.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. He's completely bilingual.
Wow. Yeah, it's ridiculous. You wouldn't, as I said, almost no accent.
Yep. Yep.
Or an American,
which is rare.
Yeah, it's maybe a little American.
Yeah, true. He would have an American.
That's funny. Right. But that's hard to do as well when you, like what you've done when you build up a church like that and then handing it over to someone. Like a lot of people struggle to do that because it's like
church too, not a failing one.
That's what I mean. Normally,
I'm out.
No, this is not going well. Who can I give this to?
Hospital pass.
Yeah, just handball it. But but developing something and then getting it to a good position, and then handing that across. A lot of people don't want to do that because it's like their baby and they've built it. And, that, it's going good. So why don't I just stay in it? You know,
there is a risk, right? Anytime you do that, and you said a word there that's kind of important that we have worked to keep out of the vocabulary of our teams, and for a reason I'll tell you, but the word is baby. We call, whether it's a project or even the church in this case, I always stayed away from that word baby because you can't kill a baby, but you can kill a project. And even though people invest a lot of time into something, sometimes a program or a project needs to be killed. It's served its purpose, and people will go, no, but that's my baby. And we'll go, no, we don't have babies. We have babies. We don't have babies like this.
Yeah.
And it's a mindset so that we know that we can end something. But we didn't want to end the church. So yeah, there's always a risk turning it over. But the other side of it is, are you just going to stay there forever because it's working, and then you're not even in the right place anymore?
Yeah.
And we couldn't do that. God, one of the things God put into us, and I realized this fairly young, is I like to start things.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me. Where some people aren't starters, you have to plug them into a system, and they work very well, but they can't develop the systems or start them, So I can do those things. And when we started that church, I asked God, I said, God, if it's okay with you, would you mind if I stayed and built it for a while? And I don't know whether he honored that or that was just how long I was supposed to do that one. But anyhow, we stayed there long enough to build it, which I appreciated, because very often when I start something, as soon as it's ready to go, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. And I recognize that about myself, and I don't think I ever leave too early on things, because there's a lot of follow through to make sure that something that you started gets established and succeeds. But I know that about myself. So, you always want to find the people. Where do they fit? Are they starters? Are they plug-in people? Are they good at keeping systems going or whatever it is? And because if you get those people in the wrong place, if you get a non-starter in a starting position, frustrations.
Yeah.
And we've made those mistakes, and that's how we discovered some of it.
I want to talk to you about, if I can, about, you talked about killing projects. And that's something that a lot of, especially in church, people struggle with.
What do you want to kill? Yeah.
I've got to volunteer.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Getting to the press.
And so, people really struggle. We have a saying in Australia, flogging a dead horse. It's just trying to keep something going that is not dead, and not being afraid to actually stop that and put your energy into something else. And we see maybe larger churches or different things that they're doing, all of these things, and why aren't we? And then we try and start all these things rather than concentrating on where we're supposed to right now. And you mentioned about how people put a lot of time and effort into certain projects, and then when they're not working or they're not, we then are too scared or too afraid that we got it wrong, or to admit that we got it wrong, that then when it comes time, we just try and keep it alive and try and keep something that's just...
Or it was successful for a time, and that it was for that time, but now it's changing and transitioning to something else, and it's like, but it was successful, but how can we get rid of it?
How do you go about that when it's especially someone else's project and it's time to wrap it up?
I think the first part is teaching people that we don't have babies, we have projects, and the projects can serve a purpose and die. Or we end it. Doesn't have to dead. Sometimes sounds like the wrong word, like it was a slow death. And of course, like you said, we have those too, and we don't want to have those. You always have to weigh it. You look at it, go, okay, is this something God wants us to do, and we're just not putting the effort into it, or the right people into it, or has it served its purpose and its time, and it needs to just be done, and we put our energies elsewhere? So, you might be familiar with when Walt Disney, in the early years, when they were actually doing their storyboards on boards and they'd put them on easels to show what their animation was going to be, he found out, early on that, they would develop these ideas, they'd put their stamp of approval on it, and they'd say, let's go with it. But he knew that 30% in or 50% or even 70% of the way into it, somebody's going to have a better idea. Mm-hmm. And they, I don't know if they must have made up the term, but they called it plussing, Plussing. And so they made that a part of their culture, that any project could be plussed. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't cry, or let me put it this way, you couldn't whinge about it. If your part of it got set aside because it got plussed. Mm-hmm. He said in the early years, people would just, but I put months into that. Yeah. Well, this is a better idea. Mm-hmm. And so, I use that example with our teams also, just to, is to prepare them that, you guys, this sounds like a good idea today, but somebody may come up with a better idea as we're moving along. We may switch, and we may have put a lot of work into it. I've made proposals for Pastor Hagen that, I spend months on, off and on, handed it to him. He glanced at him and said, no. And there's no recourse on that. That door is shut, at least for a while.
Yeah.
And you know what you do? You wear your big boy pants and you just go back and you just keep working.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, we don't have any place for hurt feelings. That's one of the things we have to get people over, in our teams and in churches, is growing up so that we have emotional intelligence, because you can do anything with a group of emotionally intelligent people, even if they don't have the highest IQ, because they're going to work together and not fight each other. So I think there's a bunch of elements there, so that when the time comes, that people don't feel like you just disrespected them for something they put a whole bunch of time into. It's part of who we are. Things are going to end. And it's going to happen to everybody. So, it's okay. I think there's always something more to do. If you did a good job with it and it's time to end it, I guarantee there's something more for you to do.
I think that even the time of the development on a project can sometimes change. It's what it was intended for at the start. It can develop. It can, I know we don't use this word as Christians, but evolve into something different. And, it can become something, like you say, we add to it. It's you don't want it to be one person's idea that no one else can add to it or build to it, because they had the original idea, so they got dibs on what happens or how it plays out. Yep. And so there's someone that can come up with an idea to do this, but then the practicality of that may be someone else's. Maybe someone else that can add to it. But if you've got someone that can't accept change to their project, then it's really hard to add certain things or change it. And then sometimes if it doesn't head the way that they thought it was going to head, or become what they thought it was going to become, then it's wrong. Or it shouldn't be.
Well, I'm about to say, working with John for a while now, I know that with projects, like, I think the difference being with your leader, if there's no surprises from your leader, I would expect, like, if John said to me, we're not doing that anymore, that's actually not a surprise to me. Like, in the sense of, it's not out of the blue all of a sudden my project's dead. It's always assessed. It's always re-looked at. It's always talked about. So I think, what you were saying before, you're preparing the people underneath you that this is not something that's precious to you. It's something we're heading this way, and that's, if it falls out of that line, we'll have to readdress what we're doing. So it's not a surprise. I think if you're not surprised, you're not going to be hurt, are you? Like, it's not.
Yeah.
Right. I think Chris said an important word there in using the word assessed, and whether we assess or evaluate, everything has to have regular assessment and evaluation from both sides and together.
Yeah.
I expect team members to be reporting about whatever it is they're working on. And if they're saying it's great, and then I look at it and go, that has been great for a while. So why are you saying it's great? Mm-hmm. I'd really like to hear where you're coming up with that. And if you're just protecting or covering their butt, well, then we have to have a talk about how that works too. Mm-hmm. So Chris is right. I mean, with regular assessments and evaluations, nothing should be a big surprise. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'll probably have said, hey, if we don't hit some markers or if something doesn't turn around, we're going to look at this in 3 months or 6 months. We're going to have to make a decision about this. Mm-hmm. And then nobody's really surprised that much. So, I can't think of hardly anybody being surprised about something we stopped doing. Like, I don't know if I can think of anybody.
Yeah, well, I think, if you fall outside of that and you do shock someone, they're either not paying attention or you're not doing your job right as a leader.
Mm. Mm. Do you think that's...
go ahead.
Sorry. Do you think that stems out of spending time with your team and developing them?
Yeah, it certainly would. And, that's part of the drawback from not being able to see people. Mm-hmm. There's a real advantage to working together sometimes in the same office for a while. Mm-hmm. You find out the quirks and maybe some of the backside of the personality that you don't see in meetings. Mm-hmm. I think it's very advantageous. Mm. Yeah. Mm. I just wanted to say one of the things you said there, though, that, usually an idea is never just one person's idea. Mm-hmm. They may have been the one that said, hey, why don't we? Mm-hmm. And maybe it's the main crux of it, but we want everything to be teamwork. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so where it gets so blended after a while that nobody could take individual credit for it. Mm-hmm. And you guys are familiar with Patrick Lencioni, right? He wrote a book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah. I'll share the book later.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. If not, you guys, these are awesome books. Yeah. They were. He is a Christian, but he wrote it for business. Mm-hmm. But if you're a Christian, you'll think you're reading a Christian book almost. Mm-hmm. And so he wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and he wrote almost all of his books in fable form, meaning it's almost like a novel. There's characters in there, and it's really easy reading. Mm-hmm. And so in the first book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, he also has a workbook with it that he wrote some additional stuff in. The last book he wrote, the last book is called The Motive, but the second to the last is called The Ideal Team Player. And really, there's this many books in between there, but these two go together. Mm-hmm. And so, but in the first book he wrote on 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, he wrote this in his workbook. I'll read it. He says, teamwork is almost always lacking within organizations that fail and often present in those that succeed. We live in a high-tech world, but teamwork remains the one sustainable competitive advantage that has been largely untapped. So he said, why don't we hear more about it then? Because teamwork is hard to measure the results and difficult to achieve, but the power of teamwork cannot be underestimated for an organization and the individual. I love what he said about that. Mm. And so it is hard to measure sometimes, but anybody who's ever worked on a good team knows the benefits of doing it. And it's just so much easier to function and come up with ideas and fulfill them, whatever we have to do as a team. So, it's ideas, whatever we want ideas coming from the team up to us, not from an individual coming up to us.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm. Yeah, it becomes all on the leader to do every facet of it. It's almost impossible. Mm-hmm. It's almost an area where you just guess because you're not in it sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's relying on them to, or at least creating that avenue for them to speak that way. It's how you find out. It's how you establish what is happening. I really like that when you talked about, you asking them to evaluate the project, and if you get that, if they're just trying to protect it, or if they're just trying to, it's good because of this, and you're not seeing that, well, that's when you can get an evaluation from the outside in and from the inside out. And it's really the only way you can properly evaluate something to determine if you continue it. And I was always a big one, something that I had to learn or to develop, that if I didn't like something, I would just ghost it. I would just not, don't put any effort or time or, you just sort of ghost that whole
hopefully
area.
It goes away.
Hoping it goes away rather than actually being honest with ourselves and evaluating, like you say, ask those honest questions. Is this from God, but I'm just not putting the time or the effort in it? Do I have the wrong people there? Rather than evaluating and being honest with that, and like you're saying, being mature and to be able to see that we can just do some adjustments here or completely change where we're headed in that sense of the project rather than just hoping it goes away. And I think that being honest and evaluating is the best, but it's got to come from them as well as from yourself, as well as from the leader.
And there's no reason for a team member not to be honest about their evaluation, because the rest of us are there to help it succeed. Not to criticize if you're not doing well, but if say, hey, you know what, you guys, this isn't going the way I planned. Could we all take a look at it and see if we could figure this out? And everybody's like, yeah. And that's part of my job, is to see the team succeed, not fail. I certainly don't get any satisfaction out of that.
Exactly.
So, there's all the incentive is to be honest.
I know for Amelia, she's taken on some big projects, throughout Europe and Africa, lately. And the biggest thing she'll say when it gets tough is it's the team that makes it easier. She says, we're in a team that I bring up, we're struggling with this, and that, and the team's working about how we make it easier. So knowing your team is not going to crucify you when you bring up an issue is a big big deal. And I know for her, she says it all the time, my team wants me to succeed. And that makes it all the difference.
I think leaders would struggle with that, especially leaders of teams. If they bring up that we're struggling with a certain area, then what you can project on that is that you seem weak or don't know what you're doing. But if we're honest with ourselves, who does? And so your job as a leader isn't to know what to do on everything. Otherwise, you just do it. If you already knew, why do you need a team? Exactly. But to be honest is something that, even as the leader, that you're not just demanding honesty from everyone else, but you can also be honest with yourself and say, hey, this is what's hard. This is what you as the leader struggle with, even if it's communication or things like that. And I think if you're honest with them, then they can help you and enable avenues of communication and stuff like that. So I think that's a big part of teamwork, is not just being that leader, that you got to be the strong person.
That's a very big part of it, which is maybe one of the most difficult parts because people want to project strength all the time. And okay, you can't be a weak individual all the time and be a good leader, but it's not necessary to be a fake leader. And if you're the kind of leader, like, years ago, because this is what we were modeled, in an organizational chart, you're up here at the top, and then you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15 people below there that are directly reporting to you, and all they do is say, pastor, 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 pastor. That's when you lay awake at night trying to figure things out, and that's when people burn out. We call that an organizational chart for burnout. And, we switched all that over to where we had teams under us, and fortunately, I had somebody that told me and said, John, quit doing all the thinking. I said, okay. He said, trust the people. And I said, okay, I will. And I had to learn to do that. And really, it wasn't as big of a deal as I thought. And, I don't know as if I can say I am as much, and I'm a perfectionist by personality type. And usually that's very hard for perfectionists to let go of anything.
It comes with your last name, doesn't it?
What?
That comes with your last name, being a perfectionist? Is that?
Yes, it does. That's very much in the DNA of that culture. And it serves well for the most part. But when you're building people and building teams, it's going to be messy, and there's mistakes, and there's financial errors by people, and you can't let the perfectionism come out and ruin people. because it'll drive them to places they can't go. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's just like sometimes, okay, this isn't very pretty, but I think this is as good as we're going to get on this one. And the extra effort to get it any better isn't really worth it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even though we have a culture of excellence, right now that's as excellent as it's going to get, and still keep everybody without either me getting mad or them feeling like they're a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in the end, you surround yourself with people that are smarter and better than you, and all of a sudden they're doing it better than you would have done it, and you're going, wow, I really didn't have anything to worry about in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you give advice to, like, so a lot of people listening, we have a lot of people that are in ministry that listen, but also a lot of people that just go to church, but they want to be involved. What would you give advice-wise? Okay, they want to be effective in their church. They want to help out. They want to, be a part of that church developing, but they're not necessarily in leadership or, like you say, that authoritarian position.
Yeah. I would say, this is what I tell students all the time, is that when we were young Christians, if you can keep a passion for building the church, and that's a very general statement.
Yeah.
But in most people, that's going to mean the local church they are plugged into. Mm-hmm. But if you can keep a passion for that and don't care about what you do, forget about titles, but just learn and be involved in every area of the church that you can or you're needed. I call it family business. And, when our kids were younger, our trash had to be out on the curb by 6:00 on Wednesday morning. So we did it Tuesday night. And I would yell up the stairs, hey, kids, collect the trash and bring it down. If I heard things like, yeah, Dad, we really don't feel led to do the trash. Or, Dad, we just don't really sense any anointing when we do the trash. Or we'll pray about it. Those would all have been wrong answers. And I would have said, well, I'll be upstairs to help you feel led. And because there are some things that need zero prayer. They just need help.
Yeah.
And, young churches and young Christians in churches, they just need to go to leadership and say, what needs to be done? And if you can get better with it instead of bitter, God will keep moving you while you're growing and get you to exactly where you need to be without you even trying. It's what Michelle and I did, and part of it was easy for us because we didn't ever care if we were a leader. That just wasn't something that was important to us. So we just did whatever. And I mean, between the two of us, I don't think there's an area we didn't work inside the church. And you can see how beneficial that became for us years later. So I would do that as a leader. Now, I mean, and then if you have somebody if you got a businessman that comes into your church, and even if he's more newly saved, he's got some skills. You don't really need him cleaning the toilets, even if he's willing. He might have some skills that you need to put to use somewhere else. And so, that's a hard one. But you want to be sensitive to it, because the businessman you'll run off if you don't get him involved in something that's challenging. And so, it's a little bit individualistic on that. As a leader, I'd say be honest with yourself and say, is there something here that I need to learn? I had to do that. Many years ago, I sat there in a training or a seminar one time, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't know this 25 years ago. Where was somebody to tell me this? And then you think, well, I had my Bible all that time. I could have seen it too. So I'm not mad at anybody except myself. But I had to change my learning curve and say, I'm going to spend some years here developing who I am as a leader so that I can lead people better. You got to get rid of insecurities and fear and everything else. And that it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy, because working with people is, and you just keep going. And, but I think there's a lot to learn from the old way that we did things to the way we do them now. It's a completely different culture. that we live and work in than what we used to. And we had to change that. But we did it together as a team. I went back to our team at the time and said, okay, you guys, I think that we need to change a lot of what we're doing. Here's what I think it is. And you're more than welcome to come along if you want to. If you don't, just say so. But fortunately, everybody did. And they're still with us all these years later. So there's a lot to relearn. And it's easier for me working with younger leaders than older leaders.
Yeah. You don't have to untrain things.
Yeah, and they can see the benefit of some of this quickly and realize that even if it takes 5 years to learn this, I'm young enough that that's not going to be a problem. If you're my age and you got to change your whole system, they don't get very excited about that.
Yeah. Some important question that I usually try to bring up most times. You been fishing lately?
It's been a couple of weeks, but I have a friend that actually bought some land and has a private lake, small one. So I was out there, and it's not fished very much, and just went out there for a couple hours and caught bass, crappie, sunfish, one other one too, whatever it was. But yeah, so I was planning on going out this week, but the way it rained every day this week, so next week I'm going to go out again.
To the same place?
I might go out there, but I'm going to go out to, Mike and Kelly. They're helping at a campground out on Keystone Lake outside of Tulsa, and we're going to go out fishing there one morning.
Yeah, that's all right. You got to find all the spots.
It's not like deep sea fishing.
Yeah, we get spoiled a little here with the saltwater fishing here.
Yeah, I mean, most of freshwater fishing is pretty small fish, unless you get up in the big lakes and get northern or musky, then you can get up to 3 or 4 feet long. But otherwise, you're happy when you're catching fish that are 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds. Yeah. So, yeah, I could fish a lot more often than I get to.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at as well.
Yeah, Chris is getting that way.
Yeah, but it's been hard lately because they actually banned us from fishing for a while. So, I had an opportunity to whinge about it.
That's one thing they didn't shut down here.
Really?
Oh, really?
They said fishing was essential. So whoever the person was there, they were right.
Genius. Yeah, I think when I first met you, that was one of the first things we talked about, fishing in Germany and the hassles of it. So the licensing and laws and... Yeah,
that was it wasn't hardly worth it to me. So I never did that there. But, here it's so easy that it's ridiculous.
Yep, jump in the car and go fishing. That's how it should be. But look, we just wanted to thank you for your time today. It's been, I know I get to spend a bit of time with you, but these guys, first time, I think they've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It was very good.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to do it again if you ever want to. I look forward to visiting you guys someday.
Well, I think in the long term, we want to, having guests in person is definitely a better thing.
Yeah.
It works, though, and... I don't know, I've only been to Australia twice, and I never got outside the Brisbane area, but I really liked it. Yeah. And to me, it was a little bit of a mix between America and Europe. And it still has its own flavor.
Melbourne more so, probably, you would say.
Yeah, Melbourne is very
more Europe.
Yeah, this end is a lot more Europe than American, but it's still, as you said, it's a good blend.
Yeah, and it's familiar enough feeling, but still unique enough. And one of the things Americans love Australians for the most part, as far as I know. And part of it is because you guys still have what we would call that pioneer spirit.
Yeah.
And, you got this huge open area, the outback and everything else, that it's like you still have wild territory. And so many parts of the world don't have that anymore. You guys do. And so it kind of does something in you. It makes you a different person. So it's something I really enjoy.
It's definitely an hour's drive from anywhere. It can be nowhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, which sounds perfect to me.
Yeah. No, it's good.
No, very good. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Learned so much in this, and I'm sure everyone listening did as well.
Yeah. Your marketing things, we'll add the link.
Add some links.
Yep.
Grunewald, whatever it is. What is it?
Grunewald Ministries.
Well, we have grunewald.org. That's the easy one.
Yeah. So if
or RHEMA.eu.
Yeah. So we'll add the
links in the podcast at the bottom.
Definitely worth having a bit of a read through the Grunewald Ministry page. There's some good stuff on there. So if you're interested in the leadership topic we done today, it was good.
I can finish, this too. We are in the process of building another website called the Church Building System.
Cool.
I have that domain. It's a .com, and we're in the process of building that there, where we can put some videos and downloadable things for people to learn how to work with teams and be better leaders. And so that's something that we hope to have out by maybe September. Well, at least it'll be live.
Yep.
Yep.
And that's sort of aimed at the local church.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. When you've got that available, definitely contact us and we'll have you on the podcast again. We'd love to go over that and talk through it all. Yeah. Because I think it's one of those things that, again, a lot of people, they get into a church because they've got a gift of preaching and they want to help and they want to do things, but not having the experience in, like, if they didn't have a business background or they didn't have any of that, it's sort of unknown territory to them.
Very much so. That's a very big deal.
Part 2, huh?
Part 2.
Yep, part 2. Yeah. Definitely.
Cool.
Part 2, yeah. Great. Hey, bless you guys. Have an extremely prosperous day there, huh?
Yeah.
Will do. Thank you very much.
All right.
You get in the ball.
Thank you.
The wrong button.
I was supposed to play the video that goes like an outro music, and I'm on the wrong screen. 1 second.
You had one job in front of all your bosses.
I know. I just failed. Wait, let's try again. There we go. See you all next time.
Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. Check us out on YouTube. We'll catch you guys later.